Hello and welcome everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian, and on today's episode, we're covering the cEDH UK Championships in 2025. This is a 110-person tournament headed out in the UK, and as many people like to know, I like covering events from other countries and places all over the world. So when a number of folks from the UK Championship reached out about me covering this tournament, I was super happy to do so. Now, obviously, by the time you're seeing this is over a month after this event happened. Obviously, between getting sick and a number of other things happening, this one got put on the back burner a little bit. But I did let some folks know that I was happy to cover this event, and that's what we're going to be doing today. So we're going to be talking about the top 16 of this tournament, talk about some of the interesting things we can see here, maybe some differences that we're going to see in the UK meta versus that the many folks are familiar with in the US or in other places in the world. So let's break down these top 16 deck lists today and talk about what we're going to see from this top 16 of the UK Championships. If you like videos like this, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and make sure to leave a comment down below. What do you think the most interesting deck from today is going to be? First up, we have the 16th place Song Shin for the UK Championships. This is a Rograkh Silas list, and it seems pretty standard as far as Rogsai composition is concerned. I want to always check on the lands present in Rogsai. That usually lets us know what kind of Rogsai list we are looking at, and usually you can also tell by the presence of Force of Will. So we do actually see a Force of Will in this version, so it's not, I believe, the version that folks are jokingly referred to as Dark Rog, which is the Force of Will free variation. But we have here a pretty classic Rogsai list with all of the standard Rogsai beep beep turbo mentality here, right? For those who aren't familiar with Rogsai, Rograkh is the enabler in the command zone, allowing you to turn on both free interaction and a number of super quick low to the ground explosive wins. So Rog able to give you a real deep level of consistency. Rog able to obviously be one of the fastest wins in the format, winning through either Oracle Consult means, classic going through the normal ad nauseum lines, sometimes using Necropotence as well, sometimes using Necrodominance. It's funny, on the last video I mentioned how Necrodominance I thought might have been a bit of an underperformer in Rogsai as of late, and actually our 6th place player had mentioned that they were very low on Necrodominance and we're taking it out post-tournament too. So definitely curious to see if that trend of cutting Necrodominance continues over time, but Necropotence a much better card by a number of different metrics. And then obviously this deck also wins with Underworld Breach as well. But this is Rogsai, classic Rogsai, trying to be sort of the fastest Grixis option around, basically saying like, listen, opponents, you're not going to get a second turn, and I'm happy with that. So congrats to our pilot for the top 16. So we have a Stella Lee list here by JBug10,000. This is super cool because Stella is often, talked about as a fringe commander and has not been doing a ton of top 16s in recent history. So it's really cool to see another Stella list here up at the top cut of the cEDH UK Championship. Playing some really cool stuff here. I know Teardrop Kami has been a piece that's sort of been adapted after Stella was popularized, which is really cool because this is just sort of a free untap effect, which gives you essentially protection for your game-winning combo turns, as well as providing a lot of value for some of those more intricate interactions when you're trying to win at instant speed as well. So Teardrop Kami, super cool inclusion here. Very low creature package in the deck. I think Fairy Mastermind here is probably not used as an outlet, more so just to get some card draw going. Very light on the creatures, as I mentioned, and then a lot of untap effects, right? For those who are not familiar with Stella, you are trying to get this commander to the bottom mode, which says copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You choose new targets for the copy. Activate only if you cast 3 or more spells this turn, right? So you're trying to get to that third spell cast and then copy a thing like Twisted Fealty, which makes infinite wicked rolls while also untapping Stella Lee, or Hidden Strings, which untaps Stella and something else infinitely, or a number of these effects like Jolt or Refocus, which untap a creature and draw a card. Some of these interesting ones like Jolt or Twitch is 3-mana untap and draw. Jolt is the one that allows you to draw on the next upkeep. So obviously this one's a little bit interesting because it doesn't necessarily let you win instant speed right then, but yeah, the next upkeep you're drawing through the majority of your deck, which is pretty sweet. You also have things like Shore Up, which are untappers that give hexproof. Same thing with Magic Damper as well. A lot of these effects that allow you to untap your commander over and over again. A lot of ways to effectively just use your commander and try and win over the top. This one running things like Commandeer, a lot of free interaction here, because Stella is really that classic is it spellslinger space. I mean, 36 instance, definitely indicative of a spellslinger mentality for this deck list. You know, a number of different artifacts to get your acceleration going, and then obviously Breachline is one of your main ways to finish the game off if you're not using one of your infinite untap combos like with Twisted Fealty there. So very cool stuff to see out of this Stella Lee list. I'm wondering if Stella might make a bit of a comeback, but it's so far been pretty crickets for the Stella pilot. So I'm curious to see if Stella comes back and makes an impact in the format, especially as things start to pick up the pace a little bit. I wonder if Stella suddenly becomes a bit less of a priority as far as removal is concerned, right? If we're talking about things like we talked about last week, where decks like Savala or Rowan are kind of getting away with sticking on the battlefield, Stella is sort of falls into the same category. So that could be pretty interesting. We have Hat Maze here with Treasure Farm Part 2. This is a Timna Crom list. Pretty classic blue farm. Definitely going a little bit bigger than some of the other blue farm lists. This is the most creatures I think I've seen in blue farm in quite some time. We're playing things like Stormkiln Artist, which I know is sort of a newer tech for folks. I've actually really liked the Stormkiln Artist tech in a lot of decks nowadays. To me, it's sort of like a second Smothering Tithe in these blue farm lists, in the sense that you stick it in the mid game and you're not really using it to storm per se, but more so in those really tight counterspell fights, especially when it gets to that later part of the game when everyone's got Ristics and Mystics and things like that. A lot of the time what ends up happening is that the mana is actually the choke point, right? Everyone's got 18, 20 cards in hand, but you only have so many free spells in your deck, right? And being able to, throw out a Flusterstorm and make like 15 treasures sometimes is obviously like the highest roll you get there. But even if it's just a matter of like, okay, I'm fully tapped out, but I Force of Will, which allows my Stormkiln to make a treasure, and now all of a sudden all my 1 mana interaction is up, so I can Swan Song, and then I have my Stormkiln trigger, and then I get another treasure back, which allows me to fight even deeper, right? Kind of where Stormkiln is actually thriving in these environments. And then obviously with the increased amount of treasure production in this specific version, being on Stormkiln, Facebreaker, Tataru Tower, and Lotho, we're also seeing a Mayhem Devil in this deck, which I know has been sort of like a blue farm tech to counter some of the more cradle focused decks out there, and especially with the amount of treasures this deck produces. Also I mentioned all those treasure producers, not even counting the fact that the deck's also on Ragavan, it's on Smothering Tithe, right? So like there's a lot of treasures running around in blue farm right now, and especially a more mid-rangey version like this one. Kind of surprised to see this one still on Ad Nauseam, but it does make sense. It's just, obviously this version's higher up on the mana value. It's a 1.33. Actually, is not as bad as I thought it was going to be. 26 lands, definitely a little bit low for such a grindy version of the deck, but cool stuff to see here out of this blue farm list. This is definitely one of the more unique blue farm lists I've seen in a hot minute. So cool to see. We have R. Smith with the Chain Linked Cafeteria CEDH list. This is their list they took this tournament. It's a Rocco Cabaretti Caterer list. Rocco definitely seems like as things are picking up a little bit of speed in the format, Rocco decks tend to be doing a little bit better, right? It falls back under that same dynamic we were just talking about, the Savalas, the Rowans, the decks like that in the world. If they get those times to set up and people are being a little bit lighter on their interaction, then Roccos really get to take over, right? For those who don't know, Rocco is effectively just a Court of Calling style effect in the command zone, right? So you have this super effective creature tutor in the zone, minus flash, obviously, but very effective tutor in the zone, and you can win through a number of different ways. A lot of them do end up with some sort of Kiki Jiki combo as sort of the big payoff at the end, but you can do Jolly Balloon Man, Village Bellringer, right? As long as you have a creature that taps for 1 mana, that goes infinite in a Kiki style effect. You also have obviously Kiki plus Felidar Guardian, Kiki plus Village Bellringer in the deck, and also Kiki plus Coercer Recruiter, which is one you actually don't see too often in a lot of these decks. You might also notice things like Karmic Guide in here. It's because they have pod lines in the deck, whether it's through getting Vivian onto the battlefield from something like an Arena Rector, or from using the ever classic Birthing Pod. And what's nice is Rocco is a 3-drop, right? So having a 3-drop in the command zone allows you to go 3 goes to Felidar Guardian, you flicker either Vivian or Pod, which then allows you to activate the pod again, which brings you to Karmic Guide, which brings back Felidar, which then flickers the Karmic Guide, which allows you to, flickers the pod, which then allows you to do it one more time, putting that in the graveyard, allowing you to get a Kiki, which makes copy a Karmic Guide, which brings up the Felidar, which flickers the Kiki, which makes you go infinite, is essentially the line there. There's also Academy Rector in the deck. You sacrifice that to go get Food Chain, mostly in a lot of these decks. But it's a very quick way to have both of these Rector packages in the deck, which is pretty sweet. You'll notice the big payoff here is Phyrexian Dreadnought. The weird part with Phyrexian Dreadnought that makes this very interesting is that when it enters, you sacrifice it unless you sacrifice any number of creatures with total power 12 or greater. So you can actually overpay for the Phyrexian Dreadnought, including the fact that if you have, for example, one of your Rectors that's going to turn into a win con, you can actually go tutor up your Dreadnought and play it, and you can sacrifice the Dreadnought and the Rector because you can overpay for Dreadnought's ability, and therefore Dreadnought becomes a sort of 1-mana sacrifice outlet, which is kind of how these decks convert on such an early and cheap Rocco enabler. Plus, as I mentioned, deck has Squee Food Chain as well as another backup win condition. Rocco decks are moving pretty quickly through the metagame right now, and it's cool to see this deck on a back like a bit of an uptick again. It's a deck I enjoy quite a lot. I think creature combo decks are really healthy for the format, and they sort of attack the deck in attack the format in a really unique way. So very cool to see Rocco out here doing some cool stuff in this meta. We have Halbarad Kennefin, I hope, with Ral lands don't go burr. So we have here, I'm so curious after that name, how many lands are in this deck? Okay, so this is a 20 land total if you include the MDFC's version of Ral with 15 non-MDFC lands. So definitely a very low to the ground Ral deck. Ral's been on a killing streak lately. Like the deck is doing absolutely fantastic, and it's definitely asserting itself as one of the better top 16 decks of the format. Very, very rarely is it getting into the top 4s very often. And I think that's a case of like top 16 really changes how folks play the game, and they're not taking as many risks that open up windows for decks like Ral, right? Whereas in top 16, as I said, like they don't take those risks. But in Swiss, right, you're trying to push your wins pretty hard, and sometimes that means you're opening up windows for decks like Ral to sneak in a little bit quicker, right? It's a little bit different when you're on a single elimination style game plan, but Ral, as I mentioned, putting up good results this past couple months. Obviously, Electro, brand new addition to the deck, obviously was not around for the UK Championship, I believe. But my days may be wrong on that. I'm pretty sure it wasn't legal then, he said with exuding confidence. We have the Sticker Goblin here in this deck. A bunch of the classic make a bunch of red mana options here for this deck. And then you're realistically just ripping spells, right? Like the idea of Ral is that you are just churning through your deck and storming and looking at more and more cards, using things like Invoke Calamity, which I know has been sort of a hot tech in some Ral lists and not played a lot in others. Return the Favor is definitely a very interesting ability copier here. I'm wondering what I guess you could hypothetically copy Ral's Ultimate with this, which is actually pretty funny and pretty interesting. But yeah, this is classic Izzet Storm. You're either winning through some sort of breach combo or through recursion loops with Reiterate. You're able to make infinite red mana and then turn that into either infinite, lightning bolts, gut shots, lava darts, etc. Just infinite ways to ping your opponent's town. The deck is fast. The deck is quick. Oh yeah, Grape Shot's another way to be able to close that out as well. But the deck is fast and very explosive in this meta, and I think, it's one of those decks that if you don't respect it at the table, it's gonna turn on the engines and go really, really fast. We have Immutable Object versus Unstoppable Force by Erskine here. This is another ROG Silas list, and as anytime we have multiple copies of the same deck list, we'll do a little comparison page here. So the differences we have here are the list we looked at earlier was on Demonic Console, into the Floodmaw, Warrior's Oath, Grinding Station, Dramatic Reversal, Chromatic Star, Vex and Babel, Steam Vents, Swan Song, and Rain of Filth, whereas our version here is on the sort of Boluses and Tomb package. You have Goblin Welder and Boluses. You have Steel Enchantment to be able to take away other folks' Ristic Studies. You have Entomb, which pays off for that package right there. A couple more wheels in the deck, Yawgmoth's Will and Deadly Rollick. Definitely actually surprised to see some of the cuts that aren't present in this list not show up here, right? Things like Grinding Station have been sort of accepted as a ROG size staple for quite some time now. So definitely very interesting to see some of the modifications that we have between these lists. This list also playing one less land in favor of a Talisman, which is pretty interesting as far as deck composition is concerned. But yeah, overall, I mean, this list tends to just kind of go a little bit bigger, right? It's got things like boluses, more wheels, a couple more 4 and 3 drops, right? Whereas this list is really trying to be slim, low to the ground, and even keep the mana value low by playing like an additional land. So interesting stuff here. We have Fuzzle here with Tim Dargo. This is a Timna Dargo list, and Timna Dargo has definitely been picking up frequency in this current metagame. So cool to see another Timna Dargo here. Boy, does this deck play a lot of creatures. We're at 27 for a Mardu deck, which is quite a lot, but Timna Dargo definitely asks that you do play a pretty decent amount of creatures onto the battlefield. It is sort of a hybrid of a mid-range deck and a turbo deck very often with these Timna Dargo lists. They are playing giant payoffs like Peer into the Abyss and stuff stuff like that. But they're not necessarily going all the way. Well, actually, this is a full ad nause list. Sometimes the ad nause is like a debatable inclusion for these Timna Dargo lists. And this one's on Bolus to Citadel as well, right? So and Necro. This one's really, really pushing the envelope as far as being a faster Timna Dargo list and putting a lot of pressure on opponents. I know some versions of the deck definitely lean more into that mid-range space, but this one is much more the case of, we're just going to slam win con after win con after win con. I do love seeing Academy Rector in the deck because Dargo is a sacrifice outlet in the command zone. It allows you to get either like a Necro or an Underworld Breach or, any of these enchantments have a huge amount of payoff. Obviously, an Uncountable Breach is a really, really huge payoff, but even just grabbing Goblin Bombardment for the fact that Dargo combos with Goblin Bombardment and either Relic or Berkey, right? For those who aren't familiar with the Dargo combos, which is the main way to win in a lot of these decks, apart from, for example, like dual caster stuff, right? But with those combos, effectively, if you have a thing that makes red every time you cast Dargo, or for example, when Dargo's on the field, like Relic of Legends allows you to hastily tap your Dargo every time you cast it, making a red mana, or you have something like Berkey, which basically says every time you cast a spell, it gives you a red, right? So when you have one of those enablers and a sacrifice outlet that also will take out your opponents, for example, that Goblin Bombardment we talked about earlier, or the Altar of Dementia. It's right here. Okay, cool. I didn't see it there for a second. You're able to go infinite that way. There's also the option to Cursed Mirror a Ruthless Technomancer. Effectively, with Dargo, if you have two copies of Ruthless Technomancer, one being a fake copy and one being your real copy that you keep bringing back out of the graveyard, you're able to generate infinite sacrifices, infinite treasures that way. So things like Mayhem Devil can pay off, or if you have infinite treasures, you can crack them all with Facebreaker. You can recur Bowmasters over and over again. There's a bunch of different ways that eventually turns infinite. So yeah, cool to see that variation there as well. So congrats to our pilot on this sick Timna Dargo. Major shout out to Heavy Play. They continue to be a fantastic sponsor of this channel and a product that I use at literally every tournament, even though that is not anything they've ever asked of me. I love Heavy Play products, and it is the reason that I'm super happy to advertise for them on this channel. If you use code Communion, you can get 10% off of your order and get amazing deck boxes, amazing playmats, sleeves. Their whole system is something that I use all the time because it is genuinely so convenient. The fact that they have their flat magnetic playmats allows them to slide into bags for events really, really easily. You avoid the hassle of rolling up playmats into a tube and sticking them in places. And even if you do want to use your own playmats, they do have magnetic tube holders that are super convenient as well if you have a playmat that you're super attached to. But between the deck boxes, the dice trays, etc., I have a smaller Heavy Play deck box that has all of my tokens in it. I have my regular Heavy Play deck box that has my decks in it, and I have my magnetic dice tray, which allows me to have my dice with me at all times. It's like I'm never rummaging through my bag to get stuff because I whip out one literally magnetically attached pile of things and then I'm all set. I'm all ready to go. So especially if you're going into any of these larger tournaments, the convenience of using Heavy Play products and knowing that all of your cards and things like that are safe is definitely worth the ease of mind. So check out heavyplay.com, use code Comedian at checkout. We have Blue Farm by Old Gnawbone, another Timna Crom list. Let's compare it to the last one we were taking a peek at. So as we can see, some pretty big differences here. 16 differences between the two lists. A number of creatures missing from the Timna. Oh, I didn't even notice the Trickbind was in the other Blue Farm list. Good thing we did bring that comparison page here. But yeah, obviously this the Blue Farm list that we talked about first has a lot of ways to go over the top. A lot of big engines like, as I mentioned, Stormkill, a bunch of those copy enchantment effects, all that kind of stuff, Mayhem Devil, etc. Whereas this version is definitely a little bit more interested in just pushing the W, right? We got Necropotence, Cabal Ritual, all that kind of stuff. You have lower to the ground bodies like OBM and Archivist. You have Steel Enchantment instead of the copy enchantment style effects. You got Wheels and Blasts and things like that, right? Just a bunch of different ways to put a little bit more of an aggressive pressure onto the opponents. Not all of the differences are doing that, but in general, like being on the Necro lines, which is more traditionally accepted in Blue Farm nowadays. All that kind of stuff is definitely showing up here and pushing this version of the deck list that we are seeing in our more recent version a little bit more aggressively. So cool stuff there. All right, we have Salamdi here with Casino Ral, the director's cut. We're going to compare the Rals here. All right, so we have a 10 difference between these two Ral lists. Our old version, the one that we looked at first, was on things like Grape Shot, Lightning Bolt, Glimpse, Karzev's Expertise, Stock Up, Vexing Bauble, Tibble's Trickery, and Overmaster in 2 different lands. Whereas our version we're looking at right now has Ristic Study in it, which definitely allows it to grind a little bit better, right? 2 more just different lands, and actually a third one on Pinnacle Monk. So this list up to 21 lands, a very experimental RAL. On Runaway Steamkin, on Ghostly Flicker, which actually I haven't seen in RAL very often, so very interested in kind of the choice there to play Ghostly Flicker. Days, which is also another one I haven't seen in a number of other RAL lists, which is kind of cool. And Faithless Looting, Twinferno, which is one of the classic RAL cards that I'm not a huge fan of, but I get it. You want to copy your instants and sorceries instead of just playing more of the same effect. But otherwise, not a much of huge differences between these two deck lists. I think the biggest inclusion-exclusion is like Runaway Steamkin, Ristic, and Vexing Bauble. I think that definitely like allows the decks to function in very different spaces. Kind of surprised to see a Vexing Bauble cut. I feel like most RAL pilots I know are really, really high on that card. So kind of cool to see a list that did well without it. We have Ralston 7 here with Roger Fatty Temur Pile. This is a Rograkh Thrasios list, and it's definitely along the lines of the classic Rog Thras variant. Obviously, Cabbage Man was not legal for this tournament, but they've updated their personal list to show that that card is going to be in the deck list. And we can check the recent changes to see if there's been any other big changes in the deck. And it seems like, yeah, it's a list that's being pretty actively worked on. So if you want, you can take a look at the history log and see kind of closer to what they were doing at the course of that tournament. Also, if you check the EDH Top 16 page, it has sort of the frozen version of the deck list, and you can take the time to compare the differences between what we're seeing here to what was actually played at the event itself. But yeah, it's a pretty classic Rograkh Thrasios list. For those who haven't been exposed to this archetype in general, this is a turbo Gaia's Cradle archetype using things like a Boro Breeze Caller to bounce your lands to untap your Gaia's Cradle. You're making a number of different bodies using Cloud of Fairies as your lands untappers as well. Going over the top using things like Seaborn Muse, a classic Thrasios option. You're either winning through a number of different means, either the Aboro lines, like I just mentioned, with a Boro Breeze Caller, Gaia's Cradle, and Talon Gates of Madara, able to put Talon Gates back into the battlefield over and over and over again while untapping with Aboro. You're also able to do Eternal Witness Snap in Gaia's Cradle, where you're able to pick up your Snap over and over again, which is pretty sweet there. There's also traditionally just Underworld Breach lines in this deck, and sometimes it plays Song of Creation to also just fill your hand up pretty aggressively, and then Breach to do classic Breach stuff, which is sort of a pivot from the rest of the deck. It's actually the first time I've seen, there's a lot of interaction for a Rograkh Thrasios list, which is pretty interesting because traditionally they tend to be a little bit on the greedier side when it comes to interaction. It's definitely the first time I've ever seen like a Commandeer in this deck as a combined with multiple forces and flares and things like that. So definitely cool to see a really, really interactive Rog Thras list. As I mentioned, this archetype does not tend to be super interactive. So cool stuff, and congrats to our pilot. Also, very notably, we actually worked together before this tournament, although they definitely added a bit more interaction since the time we chatted about the deck list. The whole Commandeer package is definitely pretty new in the deck, but yeah, we worked on this deck list right before the tournament. So if you're interested in cEDH coaching before you have any major events, feel free to reach out at community@mtg@gmail.com or any of the places in the description down below. We have Kinnan cEDH here by B-Sphinx. This is a Kinnan cEDH list. This is looking more like a kind of classic Kinnan style deck list, a little lower on the land count in general. Still on things like Treasure Vault and stuff like that, on a like one copy effect to sort of move towards the more modern version of the deck, and definitely on a few more pieces of interaction like a lot of modern Kinnan are. Definitely surprised to see Gifts Ungiven in here. Not really sure if there's any explicit pile there, or if it's just like a high value acquisition here for the deck. And this definitely on a few more of the big flips. Surprised no Nyx Bloom Ancient. If you're going to be on some big flips, that's usually a pretty decent one to be on, but they are an Emrakul, which is also pretty spicy. Obviously able to take control of a turn of an opponent who is running away with the game. So pretty great stuff there. Kinnan goes infinite with Basalt Monolith, as many know, and can also have Hullbreaker loops where you're bouncing your rocks over and over again. Same thing with Tidespout Tyrant, right? The classic Kinnan win conditions that we kind of see throughout. This list not really playing any of the other random backup win conditions. Sometimes people play like Devoted Druid and stuff like that. So congrats to our Kinnan pilot on a pretty in the middle version of Kinnan, right? Like this is in the middle of a number of different ways that people tend to build the deck list. So taking, pieces from different archetypes of the Kinnan composition and sort of slapping them together for this cool variant. We have Nadu at Home by Dan24. This is Kark Thrasios, which is a list that I don't think we see too often, but it's super cool to see. Definitely doing some pretty interesting stuff and probably going to be one of the most unique decks we talk about today. Wow. So this is definitely a Temur Kark list, right? It definitely has things that it cares about as far as Thrasios is concerned, but realistically, this is a Kark deck, right? You're winning with Breach. There's things like Kark's Thumb in here, and you can tell just by like the sheer number of instances and sorceries that are in this deck that this is far more Kark focused than Thrasios focused, and also tell by the fact that like there's not really a lot of Thrasios payoffs here, right? Obviously, Thrasios adding a couple colors, definitely good for that. Questing Druid, very spicy extra card draw that you get available to you. A lot of these other Kark variants nowadays seem to be moving off the old Kark Sakashima. I think the loss of Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt really hurt that version of the deck, but some of these other Kark variants that can sort of just stick a Harmonic or a Roaming Throne or things like that, they tend to be doing pretty well in the current metagame. Goldspan Dragon might stick out to you as kind of a weird inclusion, but the really interesting thing about Goldspan Dragon is it says whenever it attacks, becomes target a spell, create a treasure token, and then treasures you control have tap, sack this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color. So doubles your treasures, right? But also effectively recognize that it says, or becomes the target of a spell. So you can target your own Goldspan Dragon and then start netting 2 mana whenever you cast spells that target your Goldspan Dragon, right? So things like Ancestral Anger, Renegade Tactics, Spark of Creativity, Heroes Hangout, all that kind of stuff can actually start targeting your own Goldspan Dragon, Crimson Wisps, Expedite, things like that. These all can start targeting your old Goldspan, and now you're effectively doubling the mana that you're spending to cast them, plus not to mention what happens, if you can cast the spell, draw a card off of it, goes back to your hand, you make a treasure token that taps for 2 red, and all of a sudden you can play it again with Kark, right? It gets kind of out of control really, really quickly, and so definitely can escalate very aggressively. These Kark Thrasios lists, I think, they're extremely complicated and kind of difficult to narrow down super aggressively. But that being said, I do think that they're probably a bit slept on in this format right now. And I think there's a pretty nice opportunity for players moving forward. If you're a Kark fan, if you're a Kark aficionado in any way, to just sort of play a deck like this. And if you like the coin flips at all, and especially if you used to be a Kark Sokka person, I definitely check out these versions of Kark Thrasios that are starting to pop up, because I think people are actually putting some really good work into them. I was working with a client literally yesterday, as of the time of this recording, where we were talking about their Kark Thrasios list, and it's something I think is pretty real. It's pretty real. ToaMagic.com is another one of our sponsors here today. ToaMagic has been with us for quite some time, and it has been amazing. Many folks use our ToaMagic.com link. If you use ToaMagic.com/comedian, you can get 5% off of your order, and they have an amazing array of singles and product and things like that you can pick up at ToaMagic.com. They have one of the largest selections of cards that you would need for your collections or for your tournament grinding decks, etc. Check out ToaMagic.com. It's going to use that code comedian to get 5% off your order. They have amazingly fast shipping. They also have an option where if you order on their website, you can go and pick it up at location if they are working a booth at an event, right? So for things like MagicCons or any of these larger tournaments, I know they're at Steel City and a number of these other big events. ToaMagic.com has an amazing booth, amazing singles, all that kind of stuff. Once again, use code comedian and checkout to get 5% off your order. So we have Zisiel here with Kurt Voda presents what translates to essentially precision sledgehammer is what I looked in there. This is a Rog Thrasios list as well, but this is much more close to the Cradle version that we were just taking a look at for previously with Riley's variation of that. So let's do a little comparison page here. And I guess I should also mention the fact that we've entered into the top 4 of this cEDH tournament. And very funny that we have two German deck list names, which we'll see here in a second, here in this top 4. But yeah, this is a pretty sweet Rograkh Thrasios list. As we said, whenever we hit a list like this, it's time to run a little comparison. So not very different. Obviously, the Cabbage Merchant, once again, was an updated card that was not currently legal at the time of this recording. The big differences are, instead of the 4-drop slot being Displacer Kitten here, we have Ice Tail Explorer, which I actually think is pretty sweet in Rograkh Thrasios, and a piece of tech that I'm definitely excited to see if folks continue to play moving forward, especially because it's really good protection to what effectively if you lose your Gaia's Cradle, right? They're on Frantic Search, which is definitely one of the more greedy Cradle payoffs that are kind of out there right now. Another piece of interaction in the form of Swan Song, Sylvan Safekeeper. But notably, they're also doing the heavy interaction thing, right? They're doing the Commandeer thing. They're doing the heavy Force of Negation, heavy blue version of Rog Thras, right? Which is pretty interesting because that's, as I mentioned, not a very common way to play the deck. But we have two lists in this top cut that are playing very similar packages here. No Cyclonic Rift in this version, which is a little bit of a surprise to me. I think Rog Thras is one of the decks that can very easily get away with Cyclonic Rift because it makes just oodles of mana when you have your Cradle plan going. But yeah, cool stuff to see here in this top 4. Very similar Rog Thras lists that are sort of taking a new take on the Rog Thras, a little bit more interactive, a little bit more classic Thrasios style, and showing up here and performing. So congrats to our pilot. We have Wood Tier Ari here, which with what I consider the dark horse of this tournament is this really cool Timna Kodama stax list. Is a mid-range stax list that's supposed to be super disruptive, right? Is kind of the idea here. Sort of giving into this Abzan stax, which has kind of struggled in the current metagame. From what I know of the UK meta, as we can probably tell by the amount of Rals that you've seen over the course of this tournament and Rogs, right? It tends to be a very proactive and very aggressive metagame. And so obviously having a stax text like this that is sort of operating on those old values of like, hey, let's just stop all of the very greedy decks from doing their thing. It makes sense that a deck like this would make it all the way to top cut because stax is one of the few ways that you really sort of completely invalidate a lot of these more proactive lists, right? Like if you resolve a Deafening Silence against Rals, a lot of decks don't even really have a way to get rid of it, right? Which is pretty crazy, apart from like Chain to Vapor, right? So it's like effectively only a few tools in the entire composition of the deck. The problem is you have to be able to get your pieces down before they pop off. So interesting stuff here with that. Decks on Collector Oof, on Drannith Magistrate, on Aven Mind Sensor. A lot of stuff to say no to what your opponents are doing. Obviously, another deck list that did not have Cabbage Merchant in the deck composition at the time of record of the tournament. Aven Interrupter. A lot of creatures that just say, no, opponents, I'm not going to let you do what you're trying to do here. This is a Protean Hulk deck list. I know there is a whole line of Protean Hulk with Sidisi and Karmic Guide that you get off of Kodama that I don't know off the top of my head, but I believe if there's a primer attached to this with showing you the line there. But this also has the faster line of having Acerak in the deck. Which is a payoff from the Dungeons and Dragons set. But if you have that combined with Alurin, you can actually go through one of the dungeons from the original Dungeons and Dragons set that allows you to win without ever canceling Acerak's ability to rebounce itself. So it's sort of this ability to go, pay 4 mana for Alurin, instant speed, just dome the entire table, right? Which is pretty cool. Obviously, Alurin's symmetrical, so there's some real downsides with it, but the deck's probably keeping that things in account. Notably, Lurking Predators in a deck with 40 creatures in it makes a lot of sense to me, right? Lurking Predators is a card that's like extremely impactful if you can stick it, and this is a deck basically saying like, yes, I believe I do have that ability. Kodama able to cheat in a number of these very huge payoffs in the deck list, and so some really, really cool stuff here from this Timna Kodama pilot. I'm someone who's always appreciated stax decks, and I think that they're actually really healthy for the metagame. So I'm interested to see if we do see more of these decks as time goes by, maybe sort of counteracting this more proactive and greedy metagame that things are starting to move towards. So we have Brunswick here with the Black Pearl. This is Malcolm Francisco, and I guess I did call Timna Kodama a dark horse, but like maybe this is even more so that case. Blue-black Malcolm Francisco is definitely a combination I have not seen in quite some time. And boy, is this a pirate themed deck. I mean, we are looking at Changeling Outcast, Cloud Pirate, Deadeye Tracker, Grasping Scoundrel, Greedy Freebooter, Mothless Changeling, Siren Storm Tamer, Universal Automaton, Spyglass Siren, and Spectral Sailor. Holy crow. There are a lot of piles here of these pirates, right? Like the deck is very clearly trying to get that down very early. You have the combo in the deck if you have Walking Ballista in your graveyard and you have Agatha's Soul Cauldron. As long as there is not a land on top of your library, you're able to put the counter on the top of Francisco and hit your opponents with Walking Ballista's ability. And then as long as, once again, there's not a land on top of your library, you're able to explore, keep a non-land on top, put another counter on Francisco, and then just repeat that loop over and over again, dealing infinite damage to your opponents. You're on top of the classic Thassa's Oracle pile, obviously. This is a Doomsday deck, which is pretty interesting and also kind of fun because, yes, while Francisco isn't necessarily allowing you to put cards into your hand, per se, off of your triggers, you are exploring through that pile, right? So there's definitely ways where you can like mill through things with Francisco that allow you to execute a Doomsday line. It's also a ad nauseum style deck. Seems like Oracle is like your main way of winning apart from the Francisco combo. So that definitely seems like it could be a pretty dangerous proposition. Boy, is there a lot of interaction in this deck as well. Wow. A lot of really, really low to the ground, efficient interaction combined with low to the ground, efficient bodies, doing something that's like really unique and interesting. So definitely one of the coolest decks I've seen in quite some time in cEDH, and a list that's definitely taking established metagames, established decks, and saying, no, I don't need to actually do that. Let me just have fun with my pirates. So really cool stuff here from this top 4 deck list. This second place deck list of this tournament is this very, very spicy Malcolm Francisco deck. And we have here Cyrano with Stats Fiend #1, Kinnan, Bonder, Prodigy, which if you see here, it says Bing Bong Basalt Monolith, Ian, my deck name is German, use Google Translate. And of course, when you get a shout out like that by the player who wins the entire tournament, I did have to oblige. Staatsfiend means enemy of the state. So yeah, Kinnan #1, enemy of the state here by Cyrano. Very fun. Thanks for that shout out there, Cyrano. So this is a Kinnan Bonder Prodigy deck list, doing some interesting stuff here, right? Forensic Gadgeteer is not traditionally played a whole ton in these Kinnan lists, but it is a backup way to get the Basalt Monolith combo going, and also gives you some added benefit of when you recast your artifact spells, you investigate, getting some clues, get you some extra card draw, etc., etc. Definitely seems like a bit more of a, I was going to say a bit more of a proactive Kinnan list, but not like crazily so, right? We're definitely a lot of interaction like the standard Kinnan package. Another one of these Kinnans on the Gifts Ungiven Intuition style deck, and I guess I can just compare it to our Kinnan that we looked at earlier, so let's go and do that. So as we can see, there are 11 differences between our 2 Kinnan deck lists. Our winning deck list was not on Seaborn Muse, was not on Moonsilver Key, ways to grab your Basalt Monolith, and a couple of these interaction pieces, not even on Green Sun Zenith to grab your Enduring Vitality, stuff like that, your Thrasios, etc. Not even on Worldly Tutor as well. Much more on some of these packages, right? The Intuition package on top of the Gifts package here for this deck list, on that Spicy Forensic Gadgeteer tech that we mentioned, and a few more ways to sort of do the copy and card draw type game plan here. One more land as well. Sylvan Library there for the draws, and you're never going to hear me complain about someone playing Sylvan Library in Kinnan. I still think it is objectively a correct card to play in that deck list, as it's put in work for me historically. So I love to see that here for this Kinnan list. But yeah, congrats to Cyrano for taking down the whole thing with this Kinnan deck list. Definitely. Some of these UK Kinnan lists are doing some really interesting and spicy stuff here, especially, as I mentioned, like Intuition Gifts Ungiven is something I don't see in almost any other Kinnan list, but both of our top cut Kinnan lists here are representing that tech. So it's some really cool, interesting stuff here. In our top cut, they're also both representing the Emeralds, which I think is very, very fascinating. It's interesting to see the differences between these lists, but also the comparisons when we look at, these are similar in these shared lists, but completely agnostic of things that we're seeing here in the US. So very cool stuff here from our top cut, and congrats on winning the whole thing. What'd y'all think of the cEDH UK Championships? What were the most interesting decks y'all found? I think that there was some really spicy stuff. I think, the fact that we had 2 sort of dark horse decks in our top 4 really, really says a lot about some of the interesting stuff that is happening over there in the UK. And I think I'm excited to see what happens as the European Championship in Munich is sort of approaching us closer and closer. And there's a lot of other tournaments that are happening all throughout the world. So really cool stuff. If you have an event that y'all think is pretty interesting, feel free to suggest it. I can't get to everyone obviously that sort of comes across my desk, but I'm happy to be able to try and cover events from all across the world, especially if they get to, 100 plus players and things like that. It's definitely a really cool thing to explore and see what happens in the metagame, right? There's also this metagame feature here in Top 16, which I think could be really interesting, seeing that the fact that there was a lot of blue farm present and very few of them actually made the top cut, right? Kinnan ended up being half as represented, but also made multiple top cuts, right? So now, notably, I do want to say I did just catch the fact that, this was a top 40 cut tournament. I forgot to mention that at the start because it's been a while since we originally talked about covering this tournament. But this was a top 40 cut, right? You can actually tell here because the 8th place player and the 9th place player, you can see the 8th place player actually played one less game than the 9th place player, meaning that they had to play that quarterfinal match. For anyone who hasn't seen a top 40 cut before, what effectively happens is the top 40 are decided. The top 8 move right to the semifinals, right? And then what happens is 9 through 30 or 9 through 40, right? Then are broken up into 4 pods and they play a quarterfinals match, which is a format I really, really enjoy. It's definitely the smallest tournament I've ever seen use a top 40 cut. But I know it was a sort of big championship. So they wanted to basically get more folks the opportunity to make that top cut space, right? But notably, in the top 40 setting, it's something I think bigger tournaments over here should be using a lot more. It's something we were using in the past, and I'm kind of disappointed that it hasn't been as popular, especially now that a lot of events are starting to put a timer limit on how long quarterfinals, semifinals, and finals can last. It feels like to me, the biggest valid complaint that people used to have about not doing top 40 cuts was this is another untimed round, right? But if we are putting a timer at the end of quarterfinals and semifinals, then to me, it doesn't feel like that's actually nearly as much of a downside, especially if you just have 4 pods going, right? Like the biggest downside is the people who are, going right to that top 8 are just kind of sitting around doing nothing for an untimed round, but like that stuff happens anyways, right? So to me, that's not really that much of a difference. And I think like, especially when we start to look at the fact that we're hitting 280, 290, 300 person tournaments, like why aren't we having these extended top cuts? Because I think there's a lot of players who are putting up really good results and not hitting that qualification, not hitting that quota for the top cut space. So, as I said, I'm someone who's a bit of a top 40 cut fan in general, right? And so definitely a little sad to see some of the events that are not adopting it quite as much, but really cool to see the cEDH UK Championship rocking it here for this tournament. So thank you all for watching this video. As I mentioned, shout out to all the people who played some super spicy brews over the course of this event and still performed really well with them. And congrats to our players. Hope you all have an amazing week, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.